These kids have nowhere to go. Officer Maxine Holloway's frustration echoed through the empty streets of Riverside, Ohio, as Ray Charles stepped out of his car for what was supposed to be a simple concert at the high school auditorium. The community policewoman was watching a group of teenagers scatter from an abandoned building, knowing that without positive outlets, more would end up in trouble with the law. Ray Charles had arrived in Riverside in the late summer of 1973 to perform at the annual Back to School festival, but the town he found was struggling with a youth crisis that had emerged after budget cuts forced the closure of the community youth center 3 months earlier. The building that had once housed after-school programs, music lessons, and sports activities now sat empty, leaving dozens of young people with nowhere to channel their energy and talents. "Mr. Charles, I'm Officer Maxine Holloway," said the policewoman approaching Ray's car. "I'm afraid we're dealing with a situation here. These kids used to spend their afternoons at the youth center, but since it closed, they've been hanging around places they shouldn't be. Some are getting into serious trouble." As Ray Charles listened to the sounds around him, he heard something that caught his attention: the rhythmic tapping of drumsticks against a metal trash can, creating a complex beat that demonstrated real musical skill. The sound was coming from 16-year-old Darnell Kingston, who was standing in an alley nearby, his natural rhythm impossible to ignore even as he conducted what appeared to be illicit business. "That young man has talent," Ray Charles observed, tilting his head toward the drumming. "What's his story?" Officer Holloway's expression grew sad. Darnell Kingston, he was one of the stars of the youth center's music program, could play drums like nobody's business, had dreams of being in a real band someday. But when the center closed, he started running with the wrong crowd. Now he's dealing drugs to help support his grandmother and little sister. Ray Charles walked toward the alley, his white cane tapping against the pavement as he approached Darnell, who immediately stopped drumming and tried to blend into the shadows. "Son," Ray called out, "don't stop playing on my account. That rhythm you were laying down, where'd you learn to play like that?" Darnell Kingston emerged reluctantly from the shadows, still clutching his drumsticks. He was a tall, thin teenager with intelligent eyes that showed both defiance and fear. "Mr. Charles, what you doing here? This ain't exactly the kind of neighborhood famous people usually visit. I'm here because music brought me here." Ray replied simply, "And music is what I heard when you were playing. Tell me about your drumming." Over the next few minutes as they talked in the alley, Ray Charles learned about Darnell's situation. The teenager had been the most promising student in the youth center's music program, with dreams of attending music school and becoming a professional drummer. But when the center closed due to budget cuts, those dreams seemed to evaporate. His grandmother worked 2 jobs to support the family, and his younger sister needed school supplies and clothes. Dealing drugs provided money that minimum wage jobs couldn't match. "Mr. Charles, I know what I'm doing ain't right," Darnell said, his voice filled with conflict, "but my family needs money, and this is the fastest way to get it. The youth center used to give us hope, something to work toward. Now there's nothing." Ray Charles was quiet for a moment, thinking about the complexity of the situation. This wasn't just about one talented kid making bad choices. It was about an entire community of young people who had lost their safe space and their positive role models. But Ray also recognized something in Darnell's voice, the same hunger for music that had driven his own career. "Darnell," Ray said finally, "what if I told you there might be another way? What if instead of waiting for someone else to rebuild what you lost, you became the person who helps other kids find their way?" Over the following days, Ray Charles postponed his next concert and stayed in Riverside to better understand the youth crisis. He met with Geneva Thornfield, the former youth center director who had been laid off when the facility closed. She explained how the center had served over 150 teenagers, providing not just recreational activities, but also tutoring, job training, and mentorship programs. "Mr. Charles," Geneva said as they sat in her small apartment surrounded by boxes of youth program materials she couldn't bear to throw away. These kids don't just need activities, they need someone to believe in them. When the center closed, we didn't just lose a building, we lost a community of young people who were supporting each other and working toward better futures. Ray Charles also met with Judge Augustus Fairchild, who handled juvenile cases for the county. The judge explained how youth arrests had increased by 40% since the center closed, with many of the offenders being kids who had never been in trouble before. It's not that these young people are bad, Judge Fairchild explained. They're just lost. They need structure, purpose, and positive adult relationships. But instead of proposing another institutional solution, Ray Charles had a different idea. Rather than trying to recreate the youth center or establish a new program, he decided to focus on individual mentorship, starting with Darnell Kingston. Darnell, Ray said when he found the teenager in the alley the next evening, "I want to make you a deal. I'll work with you on your drumming, help you develop your skills, and connect you with opportunities in music. But in return, I want you to do the same thing for other kids in this neighborhood who are struggling." The concept was simple but revolutionary. Instead of creating another institution that might face the same budget cuts, Ray Charles was proposing to create a network of peer mentorship. Darnell would receive intensive musical training and guidance, but he would be expected to share what he learned with younger kids who were at risk of following the same destructive path he had been on. "You mean like teach them music?" Darnell asked. Intrigued but uncertain. "I mean teach them hope," Ray Charles replied. "Music is just the vehicle. What you're really teaching them is that they have value, that they have talents worth developing, and that there are adults who care about their futures." The arrangement began immediately. Ray Charles spent the next 2 weeks working intensively with Darnell, not just on drumming techniques but on leadership skills, communication, and understanding how to connect with younger kids who were facing similar challenges. They practiced in Geneva Thornfield's living room, with the former youth center director providing insights about youth development and program organization. The transformation in Darnell was remarkable. As his musical skills improved and his confidence grew, he began to see himself not as a victim of circumstances, but as someone who could make a positive difference. Ray Charles helped him understand that his own experiences with struggle and temptation actually made him more effective at reaching other at-risk youth. "The kids respect you because you've been where they are," Ray explained during one of their sessions. "You're not some outsider telling them what to do. You're someone who understands their situation and chose a different path." Within a month of Ray Charles's initial visit, Darnell had begun working with 5 younger teenagers, teaching them basic drumming skills and providing the kind of positive adult-like relationship they had lost when the youth center closed. He met with them in various locations: Geneva's living room, the basement of a local church, even in the school band room after hours. But the program expanded beyond music. Darnell found himself becoming a confidant and advisor for kids dealing with family problems, school difficulties, and peer pressure. With guidance from Ray Charles and Geneva Thornfield, he learned how to listen, how to provide support without judgment, and how to help young people see possibilities they hadn't considered. The peer mentorship model proved to be remarkably effective. The kids Darnell worked with responded to him in ways they hadn't responded to traditional adult authority figures. They saw him as someone who understood their world, someone who had faced similar challenges and found a way forward. Ray Charles continued to visit Riverside periodically over the next year, providing ongoing support and guidance to Darnell and helping to connect the informal mentorship network with resources from outside the community. But his role gradually shifted from direct intervention to consultation and encouragement. The most significant moment came when Darnell was offered a scholarship to study music at a regional college. Instead of immediately accepting, he asked Ray Charles a question that demonstrated how much he had grown. "If I go to college, who's going to work with these kids? I can't just abandon them." Ray Charles's response revealed the true genius of the peer mentorship approach. "Darnell, you've taught 5 kids how to play music, but more importantly, you've taught them how to care about each other. Which one of them is ready to start working with younger kids? The answer was Marcus, a 14-year-old who had been one of Darnell's first students and had shown natural leadership abilities. Under Darnell's guidance, Marcus began working with a new group of younger kids, creating a second generation of peer mentors. By the time Darnell left for college in the fall of 1974, the peer mentorship network included over 20 teenagers at different levels of the program. Some were receiving intensive support from more experienced mentors, others were beginning to work with younger kids, and a few were taking on leadership roles in organizing activities and connecting with community resources. The model's sustainability was its greatest strength. Unlike formal programs that required ongoing funding and adult supervision, the peer mentorship network was largely self-sustaining. The older kids took responsibility for the younger ones, and the relationships continued even as individual participants aged out or moved on to other opportunities. Officer Maxine Holloway became one of the strongest supporters of the informal network, providing logistical support and helping connect the young mentors with community resources. She noticed a significant decrease in youth crime in the areas where the mentorship relationships were strongest, and several kids who had been headed toward serious legal trouble had turned their lives around. Judge Augustus Fairchild also became an advocate for the peer mentorship approach. He began referring young offenders to the network as an alternative to traditional juvenile justice interventions, and the results were impressive. Kids who might have faced detention or probation instead found positive peer relationships and constructive activities. Geneva Thornfield returned to youth work, but in a different capacity. Instead of running a formal program, she became a resource person and advisor to the peer mentorship network, helping train the young mentors and connecting them with educational and career opportunities. The ripple effects extended beyond Riverside. Word of the peer mentorship model spread to other communities facing similar challenges, and several cities began experimenting with similar approaches. Ray Charles occasionally spoke at conferences about youth development, always emphasizing that the most effective interventions came from within communities rather than from outside experts. Darnell Kingston completed his music education and returned to Riverside as a professional drummer and youth advocate. But instead of starting a traditional youth program, he continued to support and expand the peer mentorship network, now serving as an adult advisor to teenagers who were doing the same work he had done years earlier. The personal transformation in Darnell was complete. The teenager, who had once dealt drugs to support his family, became a community leader who helped dozens of other young people find positive paths forward. His success wasn't measured in awards or recognition, but in the number of kids who avoided the mistakes he had almost made. Ray Charles's final visit to Riverside came in 1979, 6 years after his initial encounter with Darnell in that alley. The peer mentorship network had grown to include over 100 participants, and youth crime in the area had decreased by nearly 60%. More importantly, dozens of young people had graduated from high school, found jobs, or gone on to college, who might not have had those opportunities without the support network. "Mr. Charles," Darnell said during that final visit, now 22 years old and working as both a musician and youth advocate, "you saved my life that day in the alley. But more than that, you showed me how to help save other kids' lives." Ray Charles's response reflected the wisdom he had gained from years of community work. "Darnell, I didn't save anybody. What I did was help you recognize that you had the power to save yourself and others. The change came from within this community, from young people who decided to take care of each other." The peer mentorship model that emerged in Riverside became a case study in organic community development. Unlike traditional youth programs that required significant funding and administrative oversight, the network operated on relationships and shared commitment. The older kids took genuine responsibility for the younger ones, creating bonds that often lasted for years. The success of the model attracted attention from researchers at Ohio State University, who conducted a longitudinal study tracking the outcomes for participants over a 5-year period. The results were remarkable, participants in the peer mentorship network had graduation rates 35% higher than the general population in similar communities, and arrest rates 60% lower than comparable at-risk youth who didn't participate in the program. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, who led the research team, was particularly interested in understanding why the peer mentorship approach was more effective than traditional adult-led programs. What we found, she explained in her published report, was that young people responded differently to guidance from peers who had faced similar challenges. There was an authenticity and credibility that adult mentors, no matter how well-intentioned, couldn't replicate. The study also documented the positive impact on the mentors themselves. Kids like Darnell Kingston, who took on leadership roles in supporting younger teens, showed significant improvements in their own academic performance, self-esteem, and future planning. The act of helping others created a sense of purpose and responsibility that transformed their own life trajectories. Word of the Riverside model spread through networks of youth workers, community organizers, and law enforcement professionals who were dealing with similar challenges in their own communities. Officer Maxine Holloway found herself invited to conferences and training sessions, sharing her experiences with community policing and youth intervention strategies. The key insight, Officer Holloway would tell audiences, was that we were looking at the wrong solutions. We kept trying to replace what we lost: the youth center, the programs, the adult supervision. But what Ray Charles helped us understand was that the kids already had what they needed to help each other. They just needed someone to believe in that possibility. The model's adaptability was one of its greatest strengths. Communities in different regions modified the basic approach to fit their local conditions and needs. In rural areas, the peer mentorship networks focused on agricultural skills and small business development. In urban settings, emphasis was placed on academic support and career exploration. The core principle, young people helping younger people, remained consistent while the specific activities varied. Judge Augustus Fairchild became a strong advocate for peer mentorship as an alternative to traditional juvenile justice interventions. He worked with other judges in the region to establish formal diversion programs that connected young offenders with peer mentorship networks rather than imposing punishment-focused sentences. What we learned, Judge Fairchild explained in a presentation to the Ohio Judicial Conference, was that many young people who end up in trouble with the law aren't bad kids. They're good kids making bad decisions because they don't see better alternatives. Peer mentorship provides those alternatives in a way that feels authentic and achievable. The economic impact of the peer mentorship approach was also significant. While traditional youth programs required ongoing funding for staff salaries, facility maintenance, and program materials, the peer mentorship network operated with minimal external resources. Community members donated space, local businesses provided supplies, and the participants themselves contributed time and energy. Geneva Thornfield, who had initially lost her job when the youth center closed, found her role evolving in unexpected ways. Instead of managing a single facility, she became a consultant and resource person for multiple peer mentorship networks throughout the region. Her expertise in youth development became more valuable and far-reaching than it had been in her original position. I thought losing the youth center was the end of my career in youth work, Geneva reflected years later, but what emerged was something more flexible, more sustainable, and ultimately more effective than what we had before. The peer mentorship model allowed us to reach kids who never would have come to a traditional program. The networks also proved to be remarkably resilient during difficult times. When economic downturns affected the community, traditional programs faced budget cuts, but the peer mentorship relationships continued. During family crises, school problems, or other challenges, participants had multiple sources of support rather than relying on a single institution or adult supervisor. Ray Charles continued to visit Riverside periodically, but his role shifted from direct intervention to consultation and encouragement. He would meet with the peer mentors, provide feedback on their approaches, and help connect them with opportunities for further education or career development. His presence served as a reminder that the work they were doing had value and recognition beyond their immediate community. The musical component of the program also evolved in interesting ways. While drumming had been Darnell's initial connection point, the peer mentorship network incorporated various forms of artistic expression. Some kids focused on instrumental music, others on songwriting, visual arts, or spoken word poetry. The creative activities served as both engagement tools and outlets for emotional expression. Local musicians began volunteering their time to work with the peer mentorship network, providing technical instruction and performance opportunities. The annual Riverside Youth Showcase became a community tradition, featuring performances by participants in the peer mentorship program and celebrating their achievements and growth. The success stories were numerous and varied. Marcus, who had taken over some of Darnell's mentoring responsibilities when Darnell went to college, eventually became a social worker specializing in youth development. Several other participants went on to careers in education, counseling, and community service. But the most significant impact was on kids who simply stayed in school, avoided legal trouble, and found productive paths forward with the support of their peer mentors. The model also influenced policy discussions at the state level. Ohio legislators, informed by the research from Ohio State University and testimony from participants and community leaders, passed legislation providing small grants to support peer mentorship initiatives in other communities. The grants were modest, typically covering basic supplies and training materials, but they helped communities establish their own networks based on the Riverside model. By 1978, variations of the peer mentorship approach were operating in over 40 communities across Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania. Each network reflected local conditions and needs, but all shared the core principle that young people could be effective agents of positive change in their own communities when given appropriate support and guidance. The long-term impact on individual participants was profound. A follow-up study conducted in 1985, 12 years after Ray Charles's initial visit, found that participants in the original Riverside Peer Mentorship Network had college attendance rates comparable to middle-class suburban communities, despite coming from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. More importantly, many had continued their involvement in community service and youth development work as adults. Darnell Kingston's career trajectory exemplified the transformative power of the peer mentorship experience. After completing his music education, he returned to Riverside not just as a professional drummer, but as a community leader who understood how to create sustainable change from within. He established a recording studio that served both as a business and as a training site for young people interested in music production and audio engineering. The studio became another hub for positive youth development, employing several graduates of the peer mentorship program and providing internships for current participants. The model demonstrated how community-based initiatives could create economic opportunities while addressing social needs. Ray Charles's involvement in the Riverside Peer Mentorship Network also influenced his approach to other community development projects. He began advocating for grassroots, relationship-based interventions rather than institutional solutions, arguing that sustainable change required empowering local leaders rather than imposing external programs. In interviews and public appearances, Ray Charles would often reference the Riverside experience when discussing youth development and community organizing. "The kids taught me more than I taught them," he would say. "They showed me that the solutions to community problems usually exist within the community. People just need someone to help them recognize and develop those solutions." The peer mentorship model's influence extended beyond youth development into other areas of community work. Adult mentorship programs, senior citizen support networks, and neighborhood organizing initiatives began incorporating peer-to-peer elements based on lessons learned from the Riverside experience. The legacy of the Riverside peer mentorship model continues to influence youth development practices today. Modern programs incorporating peer-to-peer elements can trace their origins back to the innovative approaches that emerged in that small Ohio town during the 1970s. The principles that Ray Charles helped establish empowering young people to be agents of positive change, building on existing relationships rather than creating new institutions, and recognizing that communities often contain their own solutions, remain relevant to contemporary youth work. The documentation and research conducted on the Riverside model became foundational texts in youth development literature. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez's longitudinal study was cited in hundreds of academic papers and became required reading in social work and education programs. Her research demonstrated that peer mentorship wasn't just an alternative to traditional programming, it was often more effective, more sustainable, and more culturally responsive to the communities it served. The model's influence extended internationally as well. Youth workers from Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia visited Riverside to study the peer mentorship approach, adapting elements of the model to their own cultural contexts and community needs. The core insight, that young people are often the most effective agents for helping other young people, proved to be universally applicable across different societies and social systems. Officer Maxine Holloway's career was transformed by her involvement with the Peer Mentorship Network. She became a national speaker on community policing and youth intervention strategies, helping law enforcement agencies across the country develop more effective approaches to working with at-risk youth. Her presentations always emphasized that successful youth intervention required seeing young people as resources rather than problems. The shift in perspective changed everything. Officer Holloway would tell audiences of police officers and community leaders, "When we started seeing kids like Darnell Kingston as potential mentors and leaders rather than just potential criminals, we opened up possibilities that hadn't existed before." The same energy that might have gone into destructive activities got channeled into helping other kids avoid the mistakes they had almost made. The economic research conducted on the peer mentorship model revealed significant cost savings compared to traditional interventions. A 1982 analysis by the Ohio Department of Youth Services found that communities using peer mentorship approaches achieved better outcomes at roughly one-third the cost of traditional residential or intensive supervision programs. The savings came primarily from reduced need for professional staff and institutional facilities. These economic benefits became increasingly important as communities faced budget pressures during the economic challenges of the late 1970s and early 1980s. While traditional youth programs were being cut, peer mentorship networks continued to operate because they didn't depend on external funding for their basic operations. This resilience proved to be one of the model's most valuable characteristics. Judge Augustus Fairchild's advocacy for peer mentorship as an alternative to traditional juvenile justice interventions led to policy changes throughout Ohio's court system. The state established formal protocols allowing judges to refer young offenders to community-based peer mentorship programs as alternatives to detention or probation. The results consistently showed lower recidivism rates and higher levels of participant satisfaction compared to traditional punitive approaches. The success of these judicial interventions contributed to broader criminal justice reform efforts. Restorative justice programs, community service initiatives, and alternative sentencing practices all incorporated elements of peer support and community-based problem-solving that had been pioneered in the Riverside model. Geneva Thornfield's evolution from traditional program director to peer mentorship consultant represented a broader shift in youth work practice. Instead of managing single facilities or programs, youth development professionals increasingly began to see their role as supporting networks of relationships and empowering young people to take leadership roles in their own communities. This approach proved to be more sustainable and scalable than traditional models. Instead of being limited by the capacity of single facilities or the availability of professional staff, peer mentorship networks could expand organically as more young people developed the skills and confidence to work with their peers. The musical elements of the Riverside program also continued to evolve and influence broader approaches to arts-based youth development. The recording studio that Darnell Kingston established became a model for social enterprise approaches that combined economic development with youth programming. Similar facilities were established in other communities, creating both business opportunities and positive youth development settings. The integration of artistic expression with peer mentorship proved to be particularly powerful. Young people who might not have been reached through traditional counseling or academic support programs were drawn to music, visual arts, and creative writing activities. Once engaged through the arts, they became more open to the mentorship and support services that helped address underlying challenges in their lives. The research documentation of the Riverside model also contributed to understanding of adolescent development and peer relationships. The longitudinal studies showed that young people who served as peer mentors developed stronger leadership skills, better academic performance, and more positive future orientation than those who only received services without giving back to others. This finding challenged traditional approaches to youth programming that focused primarily on providing services to young people rather than empowering them to contribute to their communities. The Riverside model demonstrated that giving young people opportunities to help others was not just beneficial for those being helped, it was transformative for the mentors themselves. Ray Charles' final documented visit to Riverside occurred in 1984, 11 years after his initial encounter with Darnell Kingston in that alley. By then, the peer mentorship network included over 200 participants and had influenced youth development practices throughout the region. The annual youth showcase had grown into a weekend festival that attracted visitors from multiple states. During that visit, Ray Charles met with several generations of peer mentors, including some who had been young children when the network was first established and were now working with teenagers of their own. The continuity and sustainability of the relationships impressed him more than any institutional program he had encountered. "What you all have built here," Ray Charles told the assembled group, "proves that the best solutions to community problems come from within communities. You didn't wait for someone else to fix your situation. You became the people who created the change you needed to see." The ceremony during that visit included the dedication of a small memorial garden behind the high school, honoring the peer mentorship network and its impact on the community. The garden featured drums, musical notes, and other artistic elements created by participants in the program over the years. But the most meaningful moment came when Darnell Kingston, now 30 years old and working as both a professional musician and community development specialist, introduced Ray Charles to his own children and explained how the peer mentorship experience had shaped not just his career but his approach to parenting and community involvement. "Mr. Charles taught me that music was just the beginning," Darnell said to the crowd of over 500 people gathered for the celebration. "The real lesson was about recognizing the potential in other people and helping them see possibilities they might not have noticed on their own. That lesson changed my life, and through the peer mentorship network, it's changed hundreds of other lives too." The story serves as a reminder that sustainable community change often emerges from empowering individuals to become positive influences within their existing social networks. Ray Charles understood that the most effective interventions are those that build on natural relationships and leadership abilities, creating systems of support that can adapt and persist even when external resources change. The young people of Riverside proved that given the right encouragement and framework, they had the wisdom and commitment needed to take care of each other and create the futures they wanted.